Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Kyo. As North Korea continues to be hammered by economic fallout, the country's leader Kim Jong-un said a new 5-year economic development plan will be laid out next January. Meanwhile, South Korea's unification minister Lee In-young, who has been pushing for small-scale trade between two Koreas, called for an adjustment to the U.S.-South Korea working group on North Korea policies. Today we'll discuss these and more. Joining us is Stephen Noerper, a Senior Director for Policy at Koreasosaiọti. Dr. Noerper is a Senior Research Scholar at Columbia University and a Senior Advisor to the United Nations Program on Northeast Asia. Jenny Town also joins us today. Ms. Town is a Fellow at Stimson and the Deputy Director of Stimson's 38 North, a website providing policy and technical analysis on North Korea. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Chairman Kim Jong-un said the regime will come up with a new economic plan in the beginning of the next year. Can we start with you, Dr. Noerper? What was your first take?
First take is that it certainly shows that the inward-looking nature of the regime in Pyongyang now is one where the brunt of COVID, of the cutoff of trade with China associated with that, of the impact of sanctions is being felt. So Kim Jong-un is realizing that the economy, after having reviewed foreign policy this last year, is in need of much mending. He's been out on on-site inspections, highly critical, and it appears that there is an economic adjustment coming in the new year.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Ms. Town?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how a new 5-year plan is structured. The last plan seems to have been derailed by the drastic changes to the political environment in 2017 through 2020, from increasing sanctions to a full-court press diplomatic effort. None of those factors were likely expected when the previous 5-year plan was created, and is also probably why the North Koreans haven't talked about the 5-year plan during the end of the year, during the party plenum that we saw in December. I think Kim Jong-un's remarks at the party plenum in December of last year laid out a number of objectives that he felt were necessary to accomplish to better adapt to the political environment at hand, and not simply hope for better conditions. And I would assume that these will be the basis for the 5-year plan that's being drafted now.
Mm-hmm. The new economic plan will be unveiled in January, which is about 5 months away from now. But why can't they announce the plan right now, Dr. Noerper?
Well, one, it's an issue probably of planning and of capacity, but also, according to sort of communist system dictates, 5-year plans are de rigueur. It's what the Chinese have done. Actually, to get people together in January when it's much harder to travel may show, in fact, the necessity for the imposition of new measures or an adjustment to the economic approach.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Town, could you share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Technically, the last 5-year plan is still in place, even if they aren't adhering to it at the moment. It would be a process to do it in the May plenum, in the April-May plenums, rather than the January one. But I think that the January date does give it a little bit more urgency to the situation and urgency to the guidance that's needed to get through this difficult period.
Mm-hmm. Chairman Kim acknowledged the previous 5-year economic plan fell short amid unexpected and inevitable challenges. The sanctions hit North Korean economy was aggravated amid coronavirus fears and flood damage. Dr. Noerper, are these the real reasons behind the failure? Is there anything else we should look at?
It's a combination of factors. One is it's the systemic failure, right? The legacy of a Stalinist economic central planned economy. That hasn't adjusted. And what's needed is opening to the outside. And they know that. It's a matter of ratcheting toward that in a way where they try to maintain regime survivability. But on top of that, we have the very difficult realities, one that the entire globe is sharing in terms of COVID. But North Korea pulled down the shutters and essentially then cut off trade with China, with the exception of some humanitarian aid from China and Russia and some energy assistance. North Korea has not had much economic activity this year. On top of that, you have the very real public health concerns. You have the natural disaster, and certainly the flooding has destroyed a great deal of arable land, which the United Nations and others have expressed a tremendous amount of concern about relative to food shortages and putting us back into a situation that could resemble 1997. So all of that, I'm sure, is pressuring the regime to try to make the adjustments necessary because it's increasingly dire from all appearances.
Ms. Town?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with a lot of what Dr. Noerper said. There's a lot of conditions now that the North Koreans did not anticipate happening. I think over the past few years, there was a lot of hope as well that they would get some relief from economic sanctions, at least in some of their more commercial sectors. That didn't come. I think they were very disappointed about that. And then they were hit with COVID-19 and having to close those borders. A lot of their economy now is really dependent on tourism, especially, and cross-border trade. And so for that to go at this extended period of time now without any activity is a huge economic shock to the system. And so it's something that they will continue to struggle with. And like I said, it's something that's probably being debated quite widely in their economic planning circles as to how they're going to manage through this and readjust to these new conditions.
Last December, Chairman Kim Jong-un emphasized that North Korea will make a frontal breakthrough with self-reliance. It didn't turn out successful, obviously. Dr. Noerper, does this put Chairman Kim in the corner?
Well, I mean, first of all, self-reliance and the reference to Juche is something that has been with the regime, since his grandfather's time. As Jenny rightly pointed out, the plenum address was important for a number of reasons. And one of the things he did do was ask the elites to tighten their belts. And so that does imply that there is a certain constriction across the economy now, and that they're taking more serious measures. But that's an expectation. The difficulty is the balancing act for Kim Jong-un, because if there's economic tightening, both for the elites and for the general public and the rising middle class in North Korea, that type of tempering of economic benefits and the denial of an increase in economic activity is something that could threaten the regime, which puts him in a difficult position over time.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Town, is Kim Jong-un under a lot of pressure right now?
Yeah, I think he is, like all world leaders are, as a lot of the global economies are really struggling right now. I think, as Dr. Noerper pointed out, the idea that Kim Jong-un had already started talking about belt tightening before COVID became a big issue says a lot about where his mindset is, because he spent the first 8-9 years of his rule talking about trying to improve the living conditions and the livelihoods of the people and not having to tighten their belts again. So going back now and trying to change that expectation and bring that expectation back down to something more manageable, given the failures of the diplomatic process to get the kinds of sanctions relief that they would be needed in order to really do a grander opening of the economy. These are all things that will put pressure on Kim Jong-un, that now he has to manage these expectations better, and it's not an easy process.
Is it possible for North Korea to improve the economy by being self-reliant? Dr. Noerper, what does it really take for North Korea to make a real progress? The fact is that North Korea still pursues Pyeongjin policy of pursuing both economic and nuclear development at the same time. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the challenge is to convince North Korea that they don't derive security for their nation through the possession of nuclear weapons. So denuclearization is what the international community has been insistent on in order to lift those sanctions. There's going to have to be some partial lifting of sanctions, and that probably would best occur through the inter-Korean reconciliation process. And that's why we should all be supportive of those overtures, because there then you could see South Korea go to the Security Council and ask for some exceptions to sanctions. And that would begin to lighten the load for North Korea.
Mm-hmm. South Korea's spy agency said North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has delegated part of his authority to his younger sister, Kim Yo-jong. Ms. Town, is this something new? Haven't we heard a lot about Kim Yo-jong's role since March?
Yeah, it's a little unclear to me what the NIS really means by delegating authority. Does Kim Yo-jong really have autonomous decision-making power? I don't know. Certainly, she has taken over responsibility of, for instance, inter-Korean relationships. We've seen her take on other issues. We've seen other cabinet members take over and take responsibility for, their issue areas as well. And Kim Jong-un does give them a lot of room. But also it comes with consequences. You take the risk. If it pays off, you reap the benefits or you reap the consequences. And we've seen several of these members also be removed from their positions and replaced along the way. With Kim Yo-jong, I think it's very unclear what her position is, and especially in relationship to her brother. And I think there's still a lot we don't know, and that we have to wait and see how that turns out.
Meanwhile, South Korea's unification minister Lee In-young met with U.S. Ambassador to Seoul, Harry Harris, and said the U.S.-South Korea joint working group on North Korea policies should be adjusted. He even mentioned there's a view that working group is a hindrance to inter-Korea relations. Dr. Noerper, what does he mean by this?
Well, I think what he was reflecting was a widely held opinion within the current administration that it's hard to be able to have the alliance with the United States, which they do continue to profess is all important for South Korea's security, but at the same time embark on inter-Korean reconciliation in a way where the Americans are supportive of the effort. And that hasn't been an explicit part of the U.S.-South Korea relationship. It has been a more traditional alliance. So in his call is really the opportunity for the Americans and South Koreans to sit down and adjust, update, invigorate that alliance where it does include more specific support for inter-Korean reconciliation.
Ms. Town, what kind of adjustment is Minister Lee seeking for?
Well, I think I would disagree a little bit with Dr. Noerper's description of the working group, especially. I think, the U.S. is morally supportive of inter-Korean reconciliation, but the working group itself has really been focused on trying to hammer out issues that deal with sanctions. What kind of cooperation falls under the scope of sanctions? What kind of cooperation would violate sanctions? What kind of cooperation that might have been characterized as violating sanctions might still be allowed. And I think that's what the working group has really been trying to figure out. And I think what the South Koreans are trying to do is get more of a blanket exemption of this type of activity, for instance, around humanitarian assistance, doesn't need the consultation, that it's okay and it can develop on its own, rather than having to talk about every issue in the bilateral working groups, because that's really what they see as holding up the process. As they go consult, the U.S. Will express its concerns about sanctions violations, and it's seen as the U.S. holding the South Koreans back. Whether or not that's practical and whether or not that can actually be executed is a big question, right? And if it was an easy question to answer, they would have done it already.
Ambassador Harris responded by saying the working group has served as an efficient mechanism. Dr. Noerper, has he given any hint about the U.S. stance on this?
Oh, I think, I think where we see ourselves is a difficult year for U.S.-South Korea relations, certainly over the special measures agreement talks. There has been some drift in the relationship, but at the operational level, it remains close. The coordination mechanisms have improved. The working group has had some efficacy in that sense. And it's a continued challenge. Alliance management is a complicated issue.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un admitted the regime has failed to shore up the economy. Many experts, however, does not expect that North Korea will give up its nuclear program or carry out any reform of the existing structure anytime soon. We'll have to watch what kind of a new plan North Korea will come up with in 5 months. Dr. Noerper and Ms. Town, thank you both very much. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.